Hey students, this is Professor Escobar. I just got back from the 1.5 hour workshop I gave at Santa Barbara Museum of Art. So I dressed up like a little warrior, militant warrior, in the fashion of my UC Berkeley days. Um, but I'm really excited to it was a lot of fun, and I posted a couple pictures of how it turned out, but I wanted to kind of create a video so that you can experience it as well from home or on your own. Because I know everyone wasn't able to make it there. Um, so here's the handout I made. You'll find a link to it online. It's inspired by a Mexican broadside. So in the time of the revolution, printing was at an all-time peak, and that you can print for pennies, and buy for pennies like the news on the day, and it would be printed on like one side of a sheet of paper, and sometimes even posted for free during the 1920s and 30s. Um, so or 1920s. Sorry. All right. So the first exercise for this is to um com look at these shapes. You could just focus on these three shapes and insert a word that you feel completes the shape. All right, and we're just going to engage in some abstract thinking. You can spend a couple of minutes of that, pause this recording, and come back to it. I'm just going to power on through because I'm a little tired. All right, so, but take about a minute or two to put some words in. And right now, we're just engaging in associative or abstract thinking. All right, so once you're done with that, I want you, so we'll start by reading the poem. We're going to start with Carmen's poem, Carmen Jimenez's poem. On page one, she was the visiting artist last semester. She was also an artist at the museum. She's a publisher of Grey Wolf, kind of like one of the coolest poets ever. Um, so this comes from her book, Be Recorder. No Apology, a Poem Festo. Isn't there a line by Yosef Kuminyaka? I apologize for the eyes in my head. Maybe what I'm trying to say is that I apologize for the sight in my eyes, Susan Briante. I would love to make a proposal, and it is out of love, not patronizing, but true revolutionary love. And I don't upset the orbit tomorrow, and it won't upset the orbit tomorrow. So here's what I like to begin. And this might be the hardest thing you've tried to do, or maybe you already do it, and I'm grateful for you because you've inspired me. I know it's the hardest thing for me because I haven't done it consistently, not at all sorry. But I want to recommend that we stop apologizing. Today I counted and I said I am sorry approximately 22 times. I apologize for setting my stuff down at the counter at Kroger. I apologize for being behind someone at a copy machine. I apologize for someone else bumping into a stranger. I apologize for taking longer than a minute to explain my idea. Suffice it to say, I am sorry all the time. I won't tell you what to do because that makes me an implicit or solicitor of sorry. Personally, when the word comes into my mouth, I'm going to shape it into a seed to a plant in another shape it into a seed to plant in another woman's aurora as love. I only ask that we get started. This is our first step towards world domination. So for this first exercise, we're going to focus on world domination. But actually, for you'll see exercise number one, I want you to explain one thing you witnessed this season in a stranger. And then after you're done with that, explain a change in yourself in the last 3 years. So these are two things that I think happened in this poem. And I so spend like 3-4 minutes on both of those prompts, on number one and number two. And since you're doing this asynchronously, I'm kind of lumping together. Normally we would spend like 2 minutes on number one and then 2 minutes on number two. So you can pause the recording and continue on when you're done with that. So for our next poem part, we're on number 3. And in the form of a workshop, I would ask people what they wrote for each one, and they would introduce themselves. We're in a class, we already know one another, and like I hope that you find that this is exciting, even though it's happening in an asynchronous way. Um, so for number 3, I'm going to let you read the poem on your own. It's on page number 3, and it's by Harry Gamboa Jr., who was the Harry Gamboa Jr. is a really amazing artist. He I'm pulling up his something he did. He's a professor of poetry at Cal Arts, and this is one of his artworks. So back in 1972, as the story goes, the LACMA didn't have any Latino art in its history and existence. And so it's a tax collecting organization, it's a public institution. So Harry Gamboa goes and asks the curator, hey, why is there no Latino art? The curator is pouring himself a gin and tonic and says, Latinos don't make art, Latinos join gangs. And so that night, Harry Gamboa Jr. went with his couple friends and spray painted the LACMA, thereby creating the first Latino artwork that the LACMA has ever owned. In the picture, you also see Patsy Valdez in a midriff. It's taken on photographic film, filmic negative. So it has like kind of this movie kind of cinematic quality to it. The spray paint was power washed in a couple of hours. So the artwork only lasts 3 minutes or 3 hours. But this image has lasted for decades, over 5 decades at this point. So that's Harry Gamboa Jr. So I'll let you read number 3 on your own. I'm not going to read it out loud because it is very triggering, being given that what has happened this morning. But we'll move on to the next one, the next exercise. So after you read it, you could pause the recording and continue reading it. The poem on page number 3 on the right, this one, right? So the exercise after you read that poem is to provide bad directions to somewhere. And it's reading this poem, you're going to have a lot of thoughts. It's going to be pretty triggering. I think the best way to deal with it is just to spend a couple of minutes writing bad directions to somewhere. So this is called a workshop on decolonizing joy. Let me break that down, what that means a little bit. Colonization, as you know, is when Western countries went and dominated different parts of the world, turning entire nations and geographies and regions into indentured or servant or enslaved peoples, and in a way that was extractive. Coloniality is the idea that world, the old world, still influences the world today. For example, the end of slavery led to the rise of prison system. And this is documented. So instead of slavery going away, it kind of evolved into something else. And today we have people being there are more, the United States, there are millions of people in the incarceration system. There are more people that are in prisons today than were ever enslaved in the history of the United States. So why am I talking about this? Decolonization, the idea that we still live in a colonized world, so we have to take active steps to decolonize ourselves. So getting lost is a decolonizing move, and let me explain. Colonization, you probably see coloniality and experience it a little bit with tourism, right? Tourism is the idea that you go somewhere and have an experience, a set experience. You go somewhere expecting to feel something, a certain way. And tourism is exoticizing that place, commercializing it, commodifying it, making it more foreign so that you can go there and purchase and spend money and have that experience. So getting lost is the idea that we don't have to go somewhere to experience a different world. That different world is all around us. The cosmos is not just out there in the sky. The cosmos is something that we're surrounded by. We and this is very much a poet's move in that we're just observing the world around us instead of relying on received notions, received ideas, preconceptions, ideology to determine what is real and what exists and what's worth talking about. So providing that bad directions somewhere is a way to get out of this rational mind, have a little bit of fun, and create some writing. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to write bad directions to somewhere. And one of my favorite poets, his name is C.S. Giscombe, and he writes about how he enjoys getting lost. Like he'll go on field trips in the age before internet, so he would have to ask people for directions, and of course they would get lost. One of the reasons why is because language is so unstable. People would give and movement and understanding how the world is very subjective. So when someone gives you directions, he would listen to kind of the way and their speech and listen to it as if it was poetry. But he enjoys getting lost, and he enjoys kind of experiencing what is not in the world unintentionally, which is very much like a decolonial kind of thing. And you can kind of see this too. He's very much in his influence from the Beat generation, Jack Kerouac, and so forth, Diana de Prima, artists who traveled all across the United States documenting and exploring what it meant to be American in the years after the institution of the freeway system, where it became possible, almost like when Lewis and Clark, in a way much like Lewis and Clark, to transverse the entire United States. But you can do so not on foot, but in a car. So provide bad directions to somewhere. All right. You can pause the recording and continue on when you're done with that. So next, we are going to go on to page 2, and we're going to read a poem by Cecilia Vicuña. This is something that we've already done. You can kind of see how my teaching is circular, but write a 3-sentence story with something non-human. So she writes, La Niña Atahualpa, or Hen Girl, Bella Vista, 1952. My first boyfriend was a rooster. At all hours, he watched over me, perhaps thinking I was a hen. So I want you to write, it's pretty funny, right? I want you to write a 3-sentence story in which you have an interaction with something non-human. I want it to be funny, humorous, and I don't want it to be a reflective piece. I want it to have a realization. Perhaps thinking I was a hen is a realization. I don't want it to be like about memory. I don't want it to be like about the past and like evocative of that. I just want a 3-sentence story that's funny and with something non-human that has a realization at the end. People really have fun with this. And what I recommend is whenever you see something that you like, that you read, slap a sticky note down, like I said last time, and copy it. And don't copy the content, don't copy the wording, copy how the writer is putting it together. And this is also a decolonial move because you're building knowledge based on your collaborators off of the crowd, the people that we are around, right? So go ahead and write that 3-sentence story, pause the recording because I'm going to continue on. I'm a little tired, so I kind of want to just continue. All right, so I would like us to turn back to page number 1. This is a poem by Marwa Halal from her book Evasive Species. That's about like she's an Egyptian poet. It's about the naturalization process in the United States. So H. Hatem, that's my middle brother. He aged out too. He lives in the United Kingdom. I encouraged him to leave. I was angry and bitter. I wanted the best for him and still do. I miss him now that I'm back here. He stood by the garage door waving at me when I left for Egypt. I didn't know then that I wouldn't see him again for another year and a half. He started going with me to school. I was in the second grade. I would give him the window seat on the bus so that he could fall asleep. Otherwise, he'd suffer motion sickness. So for number 5, I want you to describe a moment someone gave you something immaterial. And here we can see that Marwa is not just giving her brother a seat to spare him from motion sickness. Oh, that scared me. That was Siri. My Siri talking on the other side of the room. All right. She gives something immaterial, and now it's talking on my phone. All right, it's so scary. Um, so for number 5, describe a moment someone gave you something immaterial. So she's not just giving him a seat, she's giving him kind of relief from motion sickness. For me, this summer, this past year, people have been so generous in what they've given me, immaterial things. Just for an example, when I was in Mexico, I didn't want to, I was leaving, but I had like 8 hours before my plane left. I checked out of my room. I was able to leave my luggage in the hotel, but I still had nowhere to go. I didn't want to buy another room. So I fell asleep on the street in Mexico, and not something any of our parents would recommend doing. But something that someone gave me is that there were a group of workers that pulled up across the street, and they deliver ice. And so in Mexico, a lot of the restaurants don't have freezers. They buy and get their ice delivered every day. And so there was an ice truck kind of waiting. This was around like 3, 4 when most people had their deliveries. And so they kind of watched me and I kind of watched them, and then they left after an hour, and I kind of nodded at them as I left, and that sense of safety was something that they gave me. Um, so here we see that she's giving her brother kind of relief, and very much a decolonial move in that we're valuing immaterial things. We're not valuing material possessions, we're valuing immaterial things. So I want you to describe a moment someone gave you something immaterial. Another thing, I had a friend who was a Afghan refugee, and she wrote a poem in which her brother is talking about his time being held hostage and how he still has scars from that, and like physical scars. And she says, "No, Bashim, that's just you eating too many chickens." And it's kind of dark humor, but it's also kind of something I see as a project a lot of poets have, in that they're trying to they it's important to understand the shape of trauma as not something that's totalizing. I mean, understand trauma is totalizing, but a lot of poets document how the scars and understand kind of what is the limits of a trauma, or I don't want to say the limits, but they understand the shape of a trauma and the impact, and that dark humor is kind of like what she was getting at. So describe a moment someone gave you something immaterial. All right. So before we kind of go to our last exercise, I want to kind of give you two like intermediate advanced things that you can do. One is that I want you to well, what I would like you to do now is, like, now that you have all this writing, right? I want you to go back and circle fragments and phrases. That's on the back of this handout. Circle fragments and phrases from it. Just circle like 3, 4 sentence phrases and fragments. And as you're doing that, I'll kind of talk about the last two these two intermediate advanced exercises that you can do on your own after the class, this winter, and I hope you find them very generative. So one thing you could do is you want you to list all your fragments on one side and then go around the museum or a museum and look at art, make observations about art, interpret the art, and relate the art. So one example of this is you're looking at a painting and you relate that painting to Black Lives Matter or what's happening in Gaza. You relate that painting to migrant detention. You relate that painting to, the Supreme Court rulings, relation, right? You relate that painting. Observation is that, this is a very poetic move. We observe the world and we make sense of it on our own as poets. The cosmos are not out there, the cosmos are around us. Interpretations, you're looking at artwork and you're interpreting it. So take notes, make fragments of those notes, and pair those fragments with the fragments from this exercise, from this workshop, and then create lines of poetry by mixing the fragments together. Another thing that you can do, this is kind of more conceptual, is you can bring what I call bringing the ancients to the revolution. So find your favorite poet, read some poems, find a poem that you want to copy, and then kind of reinterpret the poem in terms of a political context. So this is one of my favorite poets. His name is Basho. He was writing at the end of the 1600s when advancements in word architecture allowed for people to build cities vertically like they had never built cities, build buildings upward as if they never had before, fundamentally changing, forever changing the way that people lived. The rise of urbanism, the rise of the modern world. So he's documenting it in his poetry. Very cool guy. So he has this poem is silence is the rock absorbing cicada sounds. And when I read that, I knew I wanted to be a poet for the rest of my life. I had grown up in an area where there's now, in the Inland Empire, where there's now over 1 billion square feet of warehouses. Amazon has a big hand in that, in that they shifted physical commerce to online commerce, often through the facilitation and networking of warehouses. And so I actually bought this on Amazon. But just seeing all the buildings and all the concrete just allowed me to kind of think about concrete in a new way and have a different relationship to it. So that was really transformative for me. So I would, think about adapting the raucous silences, the raucous and cicada sounds to a more radical, revolutionary present day context. So I call that bringing the ancients to it. And you can even take one of their poems and insert the fragments from what you have had, and then start to kind of rework the poem that way. All right, so for the last exercise, I want you to get your fragments and write them on different color sticky notes. So what I did, I'm gonna step away for a second. What we did in person is get all of our sticky notes. I mean, we got all our fragments, wrote them on big sheets of paper, and then rearranged them. And I'll show you the arrangement that I want you to use. But since you're doing this by yourself, I want you to get different colored sticky notes, if you can, or different colored paper, or just use different colors. And then mix and match, or then in a checkered pattern, rearrange your fragments, and then you'll create like a really original poem. But I'll read you the poem that on page 4 that I would like you to follow that shape. As we embrace, resist the future, the present, the past, we work, we struggle, we begin, we fail to understand, to find, to embrace, to accept, to question the grief, the grief, the grief, the grief. We shift, we wield, we bury into light as ash across our faces. So I want you to take that form, this checkered, spacious form, and I want you to take your fragments and lay them out. It doesn't have to make sense. I encourage nonsense. Fighting the rational mind is very much, and departing from it is very much a decolonial move. All right. And for the last exercise, we're going to turn to glissant, and we're also going to turn to page. You'll find them on page 1, and then we'll also look at page 3. So I want you to create a chant. So to think about a struggle going on today and create a chant that will help end that struggle, such as give them water, break down the barriers, all right, destroy all borders. So I want you to do it in the cadence of glissant or wawen. So I'm going to read the poetry, and then I'll show you where you can copy their cadence. This is why we stay with poetry, and despite our consenting to all the indisputable technologies, despite seeing the political leap that must be managed, the horror of hunger and ignorance, torture and massacre to be conquered, the full load of nature to be tamed, the weight of every piece of machinery that we shall finally control, and the exhausting ash flashes as we pass from one era to another, from forest to city, from story to computer. At the bow, there was still something we now share. This murmur, cloud, or rain, or peaceful smoke. We know ourselves as part and as crowd in an unknown that does not terrify. We cry our cry of poetry. Our boats are open and we sail them for everyone. So that's glissant, and this is wawen. We sing to wing a string. We sing to wing again. All right, so I want you to create a chant that follows the cadence of wawen or glissant. And, we're thinking about sound, and we're the minimalists realize you can create cadence through repetition, and through those repetitions, it's not an exact repetition, but a bivariant repetition, where the variation, there's repetition but variation, but mostly the repetition. All right, and you don't have to write into a specific form. So we sing to wing a string, we sing to wing again. You can write your chant in that cadence or in the cadence of our boats are open and we sail them for everyone. All right. The last thing that you can do is from one of your words in your anthem, I'd like you to do a spatial sonograph. So to look at this poem Zong, from Opening of Zong by Norbese Phillips. And use space to sound out the word or a couple words. All right, and you can see this on page 2. So Zong is about the slave ship Zong, in which it was downed and 150 Africans were killed during the transatlantic slave trade. And the only document that exists is a legal document, a legal decision, a really short legal decision that entitles the slave owners to collect insurance money. So this poet used that document to kind of explore. She turned it into a whole book in which she explores the lives and beauty of the people that were drowned. And she does it often through sound and through repetition and through spatial arrangements. It's a really beautiful book. So I want you to take one of the words from your anthem, and I want you to create kind of a spatial sonograph of it so you could sound it out. And you can see on page 2 how Nobese Philip does that. All right, and that concludes our workshop. I hope you had a lot of fun. You can see from the pictures I posted how we kind of listed our fragments on colored paper on the floor of the museum. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.